Welcome to this February 7th, 2021 Sunday service at First Unitarian Church of Toledo. I am guest minister Judy Trautman, member of this church, chair of the Multi-Faith Council of Northwest Ohio, and ordained Shirag to perform services of universal worship with which the council hosts on Zoom monthly with 8 or 9 faiths, including Unitarians, presenting readings and poetry or music on a given theme. The Multi-Faith Council is concluding its 4 registered local observances of World Interfaith Harmony Week with today's service. As we explore the theme Gateways to Joy, we will consider how joy can find us, even in difficult times of pandemic, personal tragedy, and political and social unrest. Service pieces and music will reflect diverse faiths. This aligns with the 6 sources our Unitarian congregations affirm and promote, especially wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life, Jewish and Christian teachings, and spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions.
We will begin our service with the ringing of the bell and our community group sing, Whoever You Are. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Welcome back to our virtual broadcast. And of course, thank you, Judy Trautman, for joining us today and for leading us in service. The only other announcements we have the world's finest chocolates available for purchase through our church. If you would like to give your Valentine, and maybe your Valentine is yourself, the world's finest chocolate bars, they can be purchased for $1 each. Please support our community and enjoy a little sugar while you are enjoying the holiday season. The only other announcement I might offer, if you are interested in a community sing, please contact music director at uutoledo.org. We have, at uutoledo.org, we have a community postlude we're working on for the month of February. So all of that is available. If you can't read sheet music, if you've never sung with us before, that's okay. It's a short little piece that will come together and greet our whole congregation.
The opening words this morning are adapted from Bearers of Light by Marta I. Valentin. My ordained title is Shirag, which means lamplighter in Arabic. We are living in especially dark times due to the pandemic and political and racial unrest and injustice. I believe these times call us to be lamplighters, bearers of light. Let us commit to being bearers of light to guide the others out of darkness. Let the swirl of the clouds hover above us as we take to the streets of humanity, feeding our brothers and sisters the elixir that is love. To be a bearer of light is to hold in the highest esteem the building of relationships. As Rumi wrote, this being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival. Each day we have an opportunity to build a new relationship where previously none existed. A bearer of light is not concerned with what they can take, but with what they can give to any situation, even one that might rile them or aspire to throw them off course. It can be a commitment one makes to lighten an experience that might seem heavy, to share an insight, even when it might scare you to do so, to use humor when everyone around you is being so serious. It can be a commitment to be that ray of sun that emerges at the blink of an eye. It can be a commitment to remain calm when all around you the world is spinning, to remain grounded when the urge is to take flight, to remain loving when the devil is knocking on your door, pushing you into the abyss that is misdirected anger.
Our chalice lighting today is from Look to the Children by Patricia Hertdorfer. We gather this hour as a people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
And now let us recite our covenant together. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Our congregational singing today is number 327 in your gray hymnal, if you have it, Joy Thou Goddess. If you don't have it, the tune's pretty familiar, and we'll have the words on the screen. Joy Thou Goddess, fair immortal offspring of Elysium, mad with rapture to the portal of thy holy fane we come. Passion's laws indeed may sever, but thy magic joins again. Humankind is one forever, weave thy mild and gentle reign. Joy in nature's wide dominion, mightiest cause of all is found, and 'tis joy that moves the pinion when the wheel of time goes round. From the bud she lures the flower, suns from out their orbs of light. Distant spheres obey her power, far beyond all mortal sight.
The story this morning is when you arise in the morning, give thanks for the food and for the two wolves, a Cherokee parable. An old Cherokee chief was teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he said to the boy. It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, self-doubt, and ego. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. This same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf will win?" The old chief simply replied, "The one you feed."
Our anthem today is As We Sing of Hope and Joy by Elizabeth Alexander. As we sing of hope and joy today, some know only anguish and despair. How can we lift our voices in this way? While some have pain and misery to spare. If a crumbling world we would renew, we must sing no ordinary song. Peals from a noisy gong will never do. In harmony from peaceful cities hewn. Let this song our greatest hopes contain. Laughter of a well-fed child, its tune. Roofs over every heartbeat, its refrain. Its harmony from peaceful cities hewn. Sing of joy while hammering each nail. Sing of hope while pulling every weed. So shall we sing together and prevail. May every alleluia bear us seed.
And now let us enter a time of meditation, contemplation, and prayer. So much sadness and grief abounds in our times. So many deaths, COVID deaths, and deaths from other illnesses or old age that seem so much sadder as we cannot congregate to honor the lives that have touched us. Deaths from violence, such as the recent local domestic violence shooting of 3 little children, seems so much more grievous. Why does anyone need to kill when pandemic death is all around us? Why do people continue to harm others out of anger, or sometimes just because they see them as different? We are also deprived of the solace of human contact. We cannot meet the new babies that have come into our families. We miss hugs and meals out with friends, entertaining friends in our homes, greeting people in church or other places of worship, things we took for granted a year ago. We are lonely in ways we have never been before. Many people are suffering losses of income, homes, food security. Other people seem to be consumed by indifference and selfish greed. The pandemic has brought out the worst in some people. Yet amid all this sadness, moments of joy still happen. Babies are still being born in our families and our friend circles, even though we may have to greet them virtually. People are falling in love, getting married, completing degrees, and entering new professions, in spite of the challenges, and perhaps without the usual in-person celebrations. While walking out in nature, we can still see beautiful sunrises, sunsets, trees, and skies in all their seasons of beauty, birds and squirrels and deer. Even virtual conversations can trigger memories of joyful moments that we can relive, if only for just a moment. Some people are still creating beautiful music, poetry, or art that bring us moments of joy. We are inspired to create new ways of connecting with friends and perhaps appreciating our friendships even more. Grassroots efforts are springing up to support those who are hungry or homeless. The pandemic has brought out the best in some people. Let us take 1 minute of silent gratitude for the moments of joy we still have.
Spirit of life, come to me, sing in my heart all the strength of compassion. Rise in the sea, moving the hand, giving life the shade of justice. Rose, holy rose, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Our reading today begins with a poem by Mary Oliver, Don't Hesitate. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give in to it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back, that sometimes something happens better than all the riches or power in the world. It could be anything, but very likely you notice it in the instant when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb.
And the words of Sufi Hazrat Inayat Khan, joy is something greater and deeper than delight. It springs from the innermost being, and there can be no better description of the spring of joy than the dance of the soul.
In the words of the Buddha, when the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves.
In the words of Mother Teresa, joy is a net of love by which you catch souls.
Have no fear. All will be well. Joy is our birthright. Julian of Norwich.
Last November, in the midst of the angst, sorrow, and suffering of the continuation of COVID and the realization that winter was coming and the pandemic had not gone away, I chanced upon an article in The Conversation titled Finding Joy in 2020. It's Not Such an Absurd Idea, Really, by Angela Gorel, Assistant Professor of Practical Theology, George W. Truett Theological Seminary at Baylor University. We still have not conquered COVID. Winter is not over, and political unrest plagues us in other ways. Is finding joy not an absurd idea? The author makes a profound distinction between joy and happiness. Everyone seems to be seeking happiness. There are entire books written about happiness. There's even a happiness quotient that rates countries for the happiness of their citizens. But joy is not a topic that is often a part of the conversation, or if it is considered synonymous with happiness. In making her distinction between the two, Professor Gorel says, I want to be clear. Joy is not the same as happiness. Happiness tends to be the pleasurable feeling we get from having the sense that life is going well. Joy, on the other hand, has a mysterious capacity to be felt alongside sorrow, and even sometimes most especially in the midst of suffering. This is because joy is what we feel deep in our bones when we realize and feel connected to others and to what is genuinely good, beautiful, and meaningful, which is possible even in pain. Whereas happiness is generally the effect of evaluating our circumstances and being satisfied with our lives. Joy does not depend on good circumstances. She further acknowledges that you cannot do joy. And I realize that we are a solution-driven society. We want to know what we can do to relieve our sorrow or suffering. So it may take a little altering of our thinking for us to profit from what she calls gateways to joy that can prepare us for and make us more open to joy. The poet Rumi says, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. I think the same is true of joy. We need to seek and find all the barriers we have within us that we have built against joy. We need to look for gateways to joy. Gratitude. One of the gateways she mentions is gratitude. It is certainly not a revolutionary idea that gratitude is a good practice for our mental well-being. Just as the sun is always there, even when covered by clouds, there are always blessings alongside our sorrows and suffering. Gratitude can become a great gateway to joy when we make it a spiritual practice. At a particularly dark period of my life, I read a profound book called The Artist's Way, which advised keeping a gratitude journal in which I was to write 5 things I was grateful for before retiring for the night. I was desperate to feel better, so I tried it. At first, it was tedious and difficult. Oh, I could write the first 5, maybe even the second and third, but it became a challenge to come up with a new 5 each night. I cannot say that I found immediate joy. However, after faithfully trying to do the practice, even when sometimes my teeth were grinding to get to number 5, there gradually was a shift. I did begin to realize that sorrow and suffering was not all that was in my life. There were some very good things, especially supportive friends. And in realizing the blessings of those friendships, I eventually experienced joy. Going back to Gorel's definition of joy, that it is a feeling deep in our bones that we experience when we feel connected to others, my gratitude journal eventually brought that realization of connectedness. Beauty. The other thing that the book, The Artist's Way, gifted me was to dive into my own creativity. The journal was a step towards a practice of writing. I wrote some poetry and other reflections. I also started drawing and painting on a near daily basis. I let go of the notion that art had to be good in order to be worth doing. I just did it. I wrote, I painted, and the creative process may be the real meaning to being created in the image of God. Since long ago I gave up the notion that God was anthropomorphic, I did not imagine God as some man on a throne, but God created. We can be co-creators of our world, and the act of creating brings joy to ourselves and sometimes even to others. Music and dance can be gateways to joy. You do not have to be a concert musician to enjoy music, or a great ballerina to enjoy dance. Sing in the shower, dance in your living room. Listen to your favorite music genre and sing or hum along. Pick up that guitar or the trumpet you played in high school. Learn to play it again. Drum on the table. Rhythm is visceral, rooted in your heartbeat. Another gateway to joy is nature. Looking at a tree and considering our connection to trees brings me joy. When I stare at the ocean, I realize that the waves growing, cresting, and then disappearing, only to be replaced by the next wave, is an important metaphor for rebirth and renewal. It does bring me joy. And it encourages me to paint and write, so it brings creative joy as well. During the pandemic, we may sometimes find it difficult to be out in nature, especially during winter, but most of us can take at least short walks and find a tree, perhaps hug it, paint it, or write a poem about it. Remembrance. Memory can be a gateway to joy. Gorel suggests a spiritual practice of meditating on a memory of a particularly joyful moment, falling in love, being able to help someone, receiving unexpected help, glimpsing a beautiful park, seeing a new baby for the first time, playing with a kitten or puppy. Breathing in the joy of that moment and reliving it can bring a deep return of joy. Perhaps then, writing about or drawing aspects of that precious memory will further consecrate the joyful memory and bring renewed joy. Reconnection. Reconciliation and reconnection can be gateways to joy. Since joy is about connections with others, repairing a rift with a friend or family member can bring joy. It is not always possible, but sometimes taking that first step towards forgiveness or reconnection can bring a growing sense of joy. And even if there's not a rift, but life's busyness has caused neglect of a former friend, now might be an excellent time to write that letter or email or pick up the cell phone and call. I know of one person who started writing an actual letter each day of the initial shutdown of the pandemic, someone in this congregation. When I got mine, it brought tears of joy. In it, he expressed how he felt about me, the kinds of things we do not say in casual conversations on Sunday morning, but perhaps we should. His letter prompted me to sit down and write a response in which I could share my admiration for him. I do not know how he felt about the practice in the end. I know that many years ago, I decided to write a letter for every day in Lent. That's 40 letters. It meant that I connected with people that I did not know well or with whom I had lost contact. It became a very meaningful practice, especially as I received responses from many of the recipients. Compassion. When we are immersed in sorrow, grief, anxiety, or pain, it is normal to focus on that personal pain. These feelings are not a competition. Realizing that another person might be suffering even more is not necessarily helpful. We have a right to our feelings, but reaching out and helping others in ways that we can bring joy. One thing that has impressed me during this pandemic has been the number of small grassroots efforts to help others. Backpacks for Humans is a great example. One guy just decided that the homeless deserved dignity and help. So he developed a program to distribute backpacks filled with necessary items for living on the streets. The program has grown and received a lot of support from individuals and even corporations. One person can initiate change. Many neighborhood organizations have re-energized as Facebook groups to connect resources with needs. Food pantries have increased their distributions and changed their formats to be safer during COVID. Even a little gesture, like bringing in your neighbor's trash can from the curb or checking on an elderly neighbor, might bring reciprocal joy. Intimacy. Most of us are suffering from a serious loss of intimacy, the hugs and physical presence of family members and friends. Humans are wired for touch. A sustained hug can bring about neurological changes that flood our bodies with chemicals that naturally fight depression and anxiety. Yet loneliness existed before the pandemic made hugs, kisses, and hand-holding dangerous. Many of us, at least on one occasion, have experienced the feeling of being lonely in a crowd. Dr. Vivek Murthy and Brene Brown, in an April podcast, shared 3 types of relationships that are necessary for people to not feel lonely. Some of these are more obvious than others. One necessary type of relationship that we do not always consider is to one or a few people with whom we can feel safe enough to share our deepest feelings, our vulnerability, and know that we will be understood and not dismissed. I had an experience recently that really enlarged my view of intimacy. I have led dances of universal peace for many years. The dances are spiritual, a moving meditation to sacred phrases of the world's religions. In more normal times, the dancers are physically intimate. We hold hands, hug, sing into each other's faces as we stare into each other's eyes. Of course, we had to stop meeting in person when the pandemic first surged. A few months later, I and my co-leaders started presenting the dances on Zoom. At first glance, this seems a preposterous idea, dancing in our own homes to music played in the musicians' homes with a PowerPoint to suggest modified movements. It takes an enormous amount of time to prepare. I was beginning to doubt my sanity in trying to do it. But during the reflection time at a recent Zoom dance, I had suggested that each person mention something they were grateful for. And the reflections unfolded. It was apparent that many members of the circle were suffering from clinical depression, anxiety, grief, loss. To a person, their gratitude was for the circle, the dances, the love that they shared with the participants, and their appreciation for the Zoom dances and the YouTube samplings and meditations that I post for their personal meditation. And we pledged to pray for each other. There's not anything much more intimate than that. This was that safe space intimacy that we need even when we are not deprived of touch, and is so much more vital now that we are. Working for change. Working for change might be a gateway to joy. Participating in a group that wants to bring about needed change in our society helps build connections so necessary for joy, and also creates a sense of meaning in life. Grief expert David Kessler, in his recent book, Finding Meaning, the Sixth Stage of Grief, suggests that a healing stage of grief comes when we arrive at meaning. It may be hard to see meaning in the pandemic just yet, but perhaps we do see some glimmers of silver linings. Perhaps a part of the meaning we may eventually derive is a renewed sense of the value of the kind of personal relationships that we now find unavailable: singing, meeting in person, hugs, and going to religious services, football games, the museum. Yet there are things about the old normal that need changing. And now might be a good time to connect with a group that is trying to effect that change. Can we be more inclusive in our society? Can we make progress towards eliminating systemic racism? Can we improve the lot of the disabled and other marginalized people? Can we mitigate the effects of climate change and the destruction of our environment? No one person can address all the changes necessary for an improved new normal, but each of us could pick a cause and join the others to make a difference. This gateway brings the possibility of connecting with others and might be a kind of anticipatory joy, the joy of a better future. And since this gateway to joy can also involve extremely difficult and even discouraging work, Buddhists might caution us to not get too attached to the outcomes. It might be well to remember the words of Hindu Mahatma Gandhi: joy lies in the fight, in the attempt, in the suffering involved, not in the victory itself. In other words, joy lies not in the destination, but in the journey. Gorel concludes her article on an extremely optimistic note. In the midst of a year in which it is not difficult to stumble onto suffering, the good news is that we can also stumble onto joy. There is no imprisoned mind, heartbreaking time, or deafening silence that joy cannot break through. Joy can always find you. Joy can always find you. Most of 2020 and the beginnings of 2021 have certainly been challenging in personal ways that are often exacerbated by the global pandemic, poverty, and political unrest. In addition, we may feel overwhelmed by the ordinary illnesses or ordinary tragedies that are complicated by restricted travel and the loss of physical presence. But there are ways that we can prepare ourselves to embrace joy as it finds us. I hope that this sermon has suggested gateways to joy that will work for you. May it be so, and may joy find you now and always.
Thank you.